I'm Erica of Grapefruit and Gardenia Designs and the Knit Kind podcast. You can find our group on Ravelry as Knit Kind, and you can feel free to comment on the video with any questions or comments, and I'll be sure to read everything that you write. If you do like this video and the others, please consider subscribing. A little bit of housekeeping as the channel gets established. I have created a tab called Playlists. On the playlist tab, you'll see different categories. One for the Knit Kind podcast, one for tutorials, and then more as we go, so that you can easily sort through instead of looking through the list of videos. Let's see, I am not wearing any knitting today. I am wearing some new earrings that I got that were from a shop in Maine, in Portland, Maine, and I always try to buy things from other makers as well. So I will highlight maybe some jewelry in another episode. Okay, well, I was looking for what topic might be of interest to people, and it seems like the topic, how to be a better knitter, is something that a lot of people want to explore more. So as I think about how to answer this question, the question I have for you is, what does it mean to you to be a better knitter? To some people, it's to do things faster. To some, it's to make something that's more complicated. Maybe it's to tackle a garment or make a garment that really fits you well. Being a better knitter is subjective, and we all have our own definitions of it. So what I've come up with today are 10 tips that are what it means to me to be a better knitter, but I'm curious to hear from you too, and maybe we can have some topics to explore more in the future. One question that I would ask anyone who says, how do I be a better knitter, is to say, what are you hesitant to knit and why? What do you want to make and what's stopping you from that? To me, that's what makes you a better knitter. Maybe getting a little bit outside of your comfort zone, trying something, not being afraid to fail, those types of things. Better to me doesn't mean faster. Better to me doesn't even mean pushing yourself to the limit of the most complicated thing that you could find. It really means what is going to bring you more joy in your knitting and bring you more fulfillment in your knitting and your life. So I have my list of 10. I'm going to go through those. They're not going to be detailed techniques. They're really going to be topics and resources that you might explore more on your own. My number one thing is experience. Try new to you techniques. You don't have to like them. You don't have to pursue them in the long run. But you'll be a better knitter if you understand what goes into techniques. And then you can tap into them and make choices as you go. One example is, I've knit a brioche bandana cowl. It's not something I've done over and over again, and maybe in the future I will. In my head, I know I can knit brioche. So to me, that made me a better knitter. You can also do this through swatching. You don't have to just pick a big project to become a better knitter. You can say, I want to learn brioche, I want to learn double knitting, but I don't feel like undertaking a whole project. And you can just make a little swatch and see. And maybe it's a technique that you like more than you thought you would. Maybe you see where you're making mistakes more commonly, but you become familiar with a new technique. So another thing is learning and understanding the reasons why we do certain things in our knitting. And I do have a reference for you for that. If you have not heard of or read Patty Lyons' Knitting Bag of Tricks, this is full of information that can make you a better knitter. It's not going to innately make you one, but you'll understand things like why certain cast-ons or bind-offs behave the way they do, why stitches are oriented and then worked a certain way. You'll learn that there's more than just two ways of knitting, not just continental and English style knitting. And you'll understand the whole structure of how knitting works and why certain things tend to happen like they do. One example of that is yarn overs, and how come when you have a lace pattern, it's bigger on one side than it is on the other side. Another example is when we do ribbing, why ribbing that's one by one might look messy on the front and neat on the back, and what are some ways that you can work to improve that if it bothers you. So understanding the why is reason number 2 for me of how to become a better knitter. Number 3, fixing mistakes. We all make them, and the more we're empowered to fix them when we choose to, the better knitter we become. The reason for that is we can choose. We can choose if a mistake is something that we want to leave in our knitting and we're not bothered by, or we're humbled by, or it's a reminder of something. And actually I have a good example of that. Or we can choose to say, we're going to drop down in this column and fix this mistake. Or we inserted a lifeline and we're going to frog all the way back because something isn't fitting just right. So knowing how to fix mistakes, not necessarily fixing everyone, but knowing how to fix them, is reason number 3 to me of what makes us a better knitter. So I'll take a little pause and show you a whip that I have and a conscious decision I'm making not to fix something. This is going to be a bracelet. It is a cuff by Laura Nelkin, and for anybody who has followed me, you may have seen that I participated in Knit for Food this year. Well, I had gotten this bracelet kit sometime during the pandemic, and I had done about this much of it probably. And I loved it, but it was just one of those things I put down and I didn't pick back up. And so when I decided to do Knit for Food this year, I picked it back up. And when I did, I noticed a few things. It had been, I think, more than a year since I had put it down, which I didn't realize. And the needles it was on were not working for me anymore. I actually sized up a needle, which is unusual for me. And I realized after I finished the beading motif that somehow I have 3 pearls right here. Now, when this is worn and blocked, is anybody really going to notice that? Probably not. Am I? Yes, all the time. But I'm not dropping down to fix it. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is it reminds me of different times in my life I was working on this and the things that were happening in my life that came along with it. And it also reminds me of a knitting journey. So I was a pretty good knitter when I was knitting this, and I look at it now and I think junk, right? Which is silly. It's not junk. But I look at this and it just looks so much better. And is it because it's on a different needle size or I'm in a different headspace? I don't know. But I'm excited to finish it, and then I will sort of look at it as half of one phase of my life and half of another phase of my life. So if anybody is looking for something fun and challenging and different and wants to try beadwork, her little kits are adorable. They come with these little tins that have your seed beads, if there's seed beads in them. Some of them are made with leather, different fasteners, and so on. So that's my illustration of number 3, which is learning to fix your mistakes. Number 4 is teaching someone else to knit. I think we all know, certainly the adage, give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish, or a woman. But I think with knitting, it's more than empowering the other person. You will have people in your life that you will knit gifts for, and you will have people that you teach to knit because they want to learn to do that craft for someone else. And it's not mutually exclusive, but the way to become a better knitter is to explain it to someone else. And I think that's like anything. Any talent that you have or any skill that you have in the workplace, in the home, whenever you teach someone, you understand the questions they may have and how to answer those. And it might help you understand something that you thought you understood, but understand it on a deeper level. So you don't have to be a knitting teacher to do this. I think I mentioned in the very first episode I recorded that I learned to knit from someone offering a knitting lesson on Buy Nothing, which is a Facebook group. And you can offer that to anyone through your local library, through community centers, senior centers, hospitals, parent groups. You can offer to teach someone to knit with the caveat that you're not a knitting teacher, but you're willing to share your gift and share the joy of knitting. and it will help you understand even more so what you're doing and why, especially when people have questions. Number 5 for me is discovering more about the craft of knitting. So that can be everything from its history to current designers to different trends, reasons certain things were done, just really understanding more. And there's so many resources. There are, of course, library books. There are endless podcasts and YouTube channels dedicated to knitting. So I would say just go out and explore. I have a few that are favorites or that I've learned the most from. And, I wouldn't say be limited by them, and I don't have to share a whole list of them. But one that comes to mind that's been around for a long time is Fruity Knitting, Fruity knitting. And there's interviews in that really helped just open my eyes to different parts of knitting and, again, current designers, history. I have learned so much through that I would say if you haven't checked it out, that is one I would highlight. I sort of have 6 and 7, which are really sort of 5A and 5B, because they're all tied to learning and understanding more about the craft. So 6 is understand your medium. I talked in the spinning, let me see, I'll grab this, in the spinning one that I did about the Knitter's Book of Yarn. And there are a number of different resources, but really about fibers, right? About plant-based fibers, about animal fibers, about synthetics, and understanding the medium that you're working in and what are the characteristics and how can I pair something to a particular project to get a certain effect that I want. That, again, I think is something that will make you a better knitter. 7 is to get to know yarn. So beyond the fiber, what does it mean when you have a single ply, a double ply, a 3 ply, a 4 ply, an 8 ply? What are the ways that you can use that yarn to get the effects that you want in your knitting? So plies are a big one. Even twist is one. If something is spun very tightly or loosely, you can use that effectively in different types of projects. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with a certain project. If you just randomly used a skein of yarn and you got gauge and you have a product that you're happy with, that is fine. But if you're looking for something like socks that wear really well, you're going to look for a different kind of twist in that yarn, a different kind of fiber content. And all of those factors, I think, will go into making you a better knitter because, one, the process may be affected. And what I mean by that is selecting a yarn that feels good in your hands for the project is something that's going to make it more enjoyable for you. But even more so, the end product. So you might have a yarn that doesn't feel great in your hands, but you know it's going to wear like iron and you're going to wear it in socks that you're really tough on. And so that's a different effect. Or sometimes a cotton or a linen, people don't always like the feel of working with that in their hands. Not always, and it's certainly evolved a lot. But that could be the case. But in the end, you want that summer top that you're making to drape a certain way and breathe and be airy. And the end result is what you're going to get. So get to know the twist, the plies, if something is woolen or worsted spun or core spun, if it's chain plied. Another thing about it is how it's dyed and what effects you're going to get. And what do I mean by that? Well, there is dyed in the wool, where I should have had things I could grab right with me, but I've just made some Marologs, and you can see here I have wool that's been dyed that I'm going to spin into yarn. And so that is going to have the color all the way through the yarn. If you're an independent dyer, you're probably getting yarn that's bare, and you're going to dye on top of that yarn that has already been spun and plied. So those are also different things that as you're playing more with color, you'll see more about. There are dye lots when you're talking about commercial yarn, and even when you're talking about independently dyed yarn, it's different. It might be hundreds of skeins or more versus 5 skeins. But how many pieces or how many skeins of yarn are in the dye pot at the same time is a dye lot. And even when you're talking commercial yarn in a dye lot, hopefully it will all match and you can use one skein finish, use another finish, and your product will still be consistent in the end. But in an independently dyed yarn, even when they're in the same dye lot, you probably want to alternate skeins for projects where you don't want to have a clear delineation of one skein to the next. So for example, you're knitting a sweater. If it has a very involved yoke, you might want to use just one skein through that. So you're not trying to alternate skeins and do certain stitch patterns or color work where you're not going to really notice anyway. But when you're in the body and it's all one color going down and you have 2 skeins of yarn, you don't want a line right in between to show a slightly lighter and a slightly darker color. Or at least I don't. Maybe you do, and that's okay if that doesn't bother you. It is one of those things that if I'm going to invest the time and money in using a gorgeous independently dyed yarn for a sweater and a sweater quantity, I want it to look just the way I want it to look as much as I can with the artisanal nuances. So for me, I will use helical knitting if I am knitting a body of a sweater in a single color of an independently dyed yarn. And that means instead of alternating every round or every 2 rounds, I am alternating every round, but through a way where you don't have to twist the skeins. It's really neat. So if you don't know helical knitting, check that out if you like knitting with independently dyed yarn. The other thing about color, which again is something I just love, I have 2 more resources to recommend to you. One is the Knitter's Guide to Hand-Dyed and Variegated Yarn. And that's by Lorna Miser. And I don't want to give away too much here. You can check the book out of your library or buy a copy. But it will show you different ways when you have those skeins that you're drawn to, and then you buy them and you go, now what am I going to do with that? It will show you ways to be successful with different types of yarn. And it will also kind of show you about things like yarn pooling, you can do things with intentional pooling or just knit them as they are. But this way, this will help you understand how a yarn, based on how it looks in a skein, or when you open up a hank, how that yarn is going to behave and how those beautiful colors you were drawn to might look as beautiful as you thought in a finished product, or it might just be pretty in a skein, but you think, you know what, I don't want to use that in the way that I thought. The other one is called Mindful Knits, Artful Color, and it is by Laura Nelkin Bryant. It is the definitive guide to working with hand-dyed yarns. And this is another very, very educational book that will show you everything from the way the skeins are dyed to how they will knit up and what you can expect from them, how to use magic numbers to get planned pooling. And what do I mean by that? Well, probably if you are very current on trends, you'll see a lot of shawls that are done with yarn that are made specifically so that when you get to a certain color, you do a certain stitch. But there's much more than that. There are designs like this. There's a cowl that I've had in my queue forever called the Da Vinci cowl that I haven't knit, but same thing. It does a planned pooling. And you'll see in this book case studies, and the case studies will show you from the same skein of yarn different effects that you can get. So you don't have to fly by the seat of your pants with these beautifully variegated yarns. You can, and there's fun in that sometimes too. But I think knowledge is power. So that's what I'm getting back to when I say, how do you be a better knitter? You know what you can, learn what you can, know what you don't know, and have the ability or be empowered to make choices based on that information. You don't have to know every trick in Patty Lyons' book. You don't have to take a skein and figure out exactly how you want the colors to fall. But if you know that there's ways that you can do that, you can choose whether or not to do them. So my last 3, fairly quickly, are explore different constructions. And that doesn't have to be just for sweaters. We know in sweaters there are drop shoulders, set-in sleeves, raglan style, bottom up, top down. Well, again, I think being a better knitter means try different styles. Because if you try different styles, you'll settle on maybe what you have a preference for, whether that be the process or the product. But you'll never know if you don't try it. And it doesn't have to be limited to sweaters. There are shawls. There are so many different triangle, crescent, asymmetrical, right? There's all of these different styles of shawls as well. And I now know when I see a shawl pattern come out, I don't have to be just drawn to the color or the size or the yarn. I can look and say, oh, that's a triangle shawl. And I know that those are one of my favorites to wear because to me, they fit better. For me, I wear them more easily. Crescent shawls, I don't know why, but often they're just either so long for me that I have trouble styling them. I actually haven't made too many shorter ones, so I shouldn't really say on that. But it will be a beautiful, beautiful shawl, and it just isn't something that I can either easily wear or easily wear in a way that shows off how beautiful it is. I don't wear a ton of dresses anymore where I can walk around and sort of show from behind how beautiful that shawl is. Those, to me, is the best way to wear them and really show off your stitch work, but I'm digressing. What I'm saying is figure out the construction of different things, even cowls. So I've designed a handful of cowls this winter because I wanted to kind of do something that I didn't see as much out there. I made some split hem cowls and some Dickie style cowls, and I'll show those on another episode. But, the reason I was able to do that is because I knitted so many different types and different constructions. And it can even be something where something's knitted side to side. Stitches are picked up, again, top down, bottom up. There are some really neat constructions out there. Even for things like cowls, I've seen some, I can't think of what this one's called, but it's knitted in one direction and separately in another direction. So it doesn't have to be just sweaters. If you're not a sweater knitter, you don't have to limit yourself to trying different constructions. You can certainly do that with accessories as well, including mittens. So let's see. Number 9 is know your body and your measurements. And again, it's very important for sweater knitting, but it's not only sweater knitting. If you're knitting a cowl, you don't have to knit it to the length that the pattern says. If you're knitting a hat, you might prefer slouchier. You might prefer tighter. You might want the brim to flip over. And all of these things, really knowing and understanding your body, will make you a better knitter because you will want to wear that end product more, most likely, if it fits you well and if it's comfortable. For me, sweaters are a big one. And I mentioned in the Stranded Color Work podcast about my arms and my neck and my bust and my waist and my hips. I am like 4 different sizes on a chart. So by knowing my shape and knowing how things fit me, I can make choices to modify. And that in the end makes me so that I want to wear the end product more. And number 10 is polished, finished objects. So what do I mean by that? When you are doing finishing, even amongst experts, there'll be different ways that people prefer to pick up stitches. And there'll be different ways that it's recommended that you seam or do a bind off, right? It might be, if you're doing something with a slope to it, you can have a stepped bind off or a sloped bind off. If you're doing a shoulder seam, you might be able to do a 3-needle bind off. But it might not have enough structure or support. If there are things like the jog I mentioned when you're doing color work knitting, How do you make it so the jog lines up better? How do you make the rib tighten up? How do you prevent little holes, little gaps in your armholes? These are all things that learning those little tips and tricks about having a more polished, finished object, I think, can make you a better knitter. So that's my list of 10, and I have a few minutes left at the end to show you my finished object and one more whip. My finished object this week is not a piece of knitting. It is the skein of yarn that I showed you that I was spinning. And I am just smitten by this skein of yarn. I just want to cuddle it. It is so soft. It is, actually have the tag right here from the fiber. It's 50% alpaca, 30% merino, and 20% silk. It was 3 ounces. It was from Dorchester Farms. And hand painted. I just love this corally pink color. I made a 3-ply yarn. And I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. But I have held it next to so many colors. And I can't decide between a cream or a dark brown or a beigey color. I don't know. But if you have any suggestions, let me know. I do think I want it near my face and my skin. I will show you a little acquisition when I was playing with color. I was in Portland, Maine this weekend, which I have one more acquisition to show you at another time. But I did get this big old fluffy pile of, it's from a sheep, well, it's called Sweetie. I thought that was maybe the sheep, but it's a blend of Cormo, Finn, and Blue-Faced Leicester from Underhill Fibers, Spinning and Carding Mill in Gorham, Maine. Do you like dark brown with the... I don't know. I can't decide. Tell me what you think. Maybe cream. Maybe lighter brown. Maybe I should just leave it by itself. I don't know. That's my finished object. And my other whip, which is work in progress, I make one of these sweaters a year almost. This is only my 3rd one, but it's just something about this little sweater. If you have never seen the Moraine sweater by tincanknits, this year I'm making it. I've made all 3 in Malabrigo Rios. I usually make the size 2 to 4T. I'd say size up on this one. It probably fits more like a size 1 to 3. If I am truly making it to be 2 to 4T, I try to make it a little bit bigger. It's a slim fit sweater. It's long sleeves. The whole thing is colorwork. So you have the colorwork yoke at the top. And then the body is in lace stitch. And it's long sleeves. And then there's a strip of colorwork on the bottom and on the bottom of each sleeve. So this one's just a winner. I don't know what else to say, but if you like the looks of this and you love color work and you have any little people, use an adult size pattern too, but there's something about this little person one. And I have some pictures in my Ravelry projects of the other 2 that I've knitted as well. So that's my work in progress for this week, in addition to the bracelet, which I'm doing on and off, and the spinning, which I'm doing behind me. And I have, other than that, I think just some purchases to show you. Maybe I'll record a shorter video for that one. So, knit kind, live kind, or knit kindly, live kindly. Spread joy, be happy, and I will chat with you again soon.